Now, the German Chancellor Angela Merkel is addressing both houses of the British Parliament this hour. She is the first German leader to do so in a quarter of a century. It's an action-packed day for her after she'll have lunch, because afterwards she'll have lunch at 10 Downing Street with the Prime Minister. Discussions, no doubt, about Europe there. And she'll have tea with the Queen. And currently you've got the Speaker of the lower house there addressing the joint houses. This is a great honour because it only happens very occasionally. And it is the full red carpet treatment today. Stephen Booth is with me. He's research director of the business think tank Open Europe. He's due to be listening into Miss Merkel's remarks very closely because from the British perspective, this is all about actually Britain's place in Europe, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. That's why Angela Merkel has been given this red carpet treatment. David Cameron is very keen to secure Angela Merkel's support for his reform agenda in Europe. And this meeting will also be crucial in building up that campaign as he approaches the general election and potentially afterwards. Let's
talk to those who are outside the UK, don't fully understand what's happening in this country. Britain has a reputation for Euroscepticism. Still wants a relationship with Europe, but there's more doubt about how close those ties should be.
Yes, I think the general feeling among the population is that we would like a less integrated relationship with Europe. There's no prospect of Britain joining the single currency, so you have to develop a new relationship with that burgeoning kind of currency union. And I think David Cameron has pledged so far that if he wins the general election, he will renegotiate the UK's terms of membership and put that to a referendum in 2017.
Is his vision, do you think, to retain the economic bloc, but to withdraw from a lot of the political commitments to Brussels?
Yes, I think David Cameron's aim, and I think it's one that will be shared by a majority of people in the UK, is to make sure the single market works, so the economic union, the free movement of goods, businesses, people, and capital, but to get less integrated into some of the political aspects of what the EU does, so crime and justice laws, the over-regulation that businesses feel comes from Brussels, and also get more involvement from national parliaments in decision-making to feel that this is something that is responsive to the democratic will of the member states, and it's not something that's being imposed on the member states from Brussels.
In order for David Cameron to get what he wants, he sees Angela Merkel as the route to that. She has to approve any loosening of ties. This is her opportunity to say, David Cameron, you're going to get everything you want. What do you expect her to say?
Well, I think the difficulty for Angela Merkel is, that's right. I think that David Cameron does see Angela Merkel as key, and clearly her role as the most powerful politician in Europe, clearly she is going to be fundamental to any change in relationship with the EU and how the EU develops. But the challenge for Angela Merkel at the moment is that David Cameron hasn't really been explicit about what it is that he does want to change.
Well, exactly, hasn't told her, has he?
Exactly, and that's part of the problem. And one of the things that we'd be urging is that actually he can't leave it all until after the general election. He has to start building. You can't have an 18-month window between 2015 and a 2017 referendum. You have to start building momentum now, and not just with Angela Merkel, but you have to have a broader coalition of interests at the EU level to get this done, because Angela Merkel can't do it on her own. She needs other countries to be on board.
We're just going to have a quick listen in because we think she's going to take the stand imminently after we hear from Mr. Burko there. Here we go.
Mr. Speaker, Lord Speaker, Prime Minister, Members of Parliament, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I would like to thank both Houses of Parliament most sincerely for allowing me to stand before you today. I am aware of the very great honor bestowed on me. I am the third representative of the Federal Republic of Germany, following Federal Chancellor Willy Brandt in 1970 and German Federal President Richard von Weizsäcker in 1986 to speak to you. I regard this invitation as an expression of the close relations between our countries. Not only the governments, but also the people of our two countries are linked by close partnership. I shall never forget my first visit to London in the spring of 1990, very soon after the fall of the Berlin Wall and quite a few months before German unification. My husband had been invited here by fellow scientists, and I entered the Royal Institution for the very first time in my life. We walked through Hyde Park looking for Speaker's Corner, which, especially for us East Germans, was legendary, the very symbol of free speech. I hope that is not an insult to you, the members of British Parliament. Afterwards, we went to a concert in the Royal Albert Hall. We were in a country in which people were rejoicing with us Germans about the collapse of socialism in Central and Eastern Europe and the fall of the Berlin Wall. It was a terrific trip. Now, I've been told many times during the last few days that there are very special expectations of my speech here today. Supposedly, or so I have heard, some expect my speech to pave the way for a fundamental reform of the European architecture, which will satisfy all kinds of alleged or actual British wishes. I'm afraid they are in for a disappointment. I've also heard that others are expecting the exact opposite and are hoping that I will deliver the clear and simple message here in London that the rest of Europe is not prepared to pay almost any price to keep Britain in the European Union. I'm afraid these hopes will be dashed too. If what I've been told is true, then it will be obvious to everyone that I find myself caught between the devil and the deep blue sea. That, ladies and gentlemen, is not a pleasant position to be in, at least not for a German head of government. Nevertheless, that cannot in any way spoil my pleasure at being here today. On the contrary, my pleasure at being here is great because I simply want to share my thoughts with you. My thoughts about Europe, its promises and weaknesses, my thoughts on Germany and Britain in this Europe. And I do so at a time in which many decisions will be made on how we, as Germans, Britons, French or Poles, as Italians, and all the other European nations and people can assert our values and interests in the world. As naturally I can express my thoughts better in my native language, I hope you will forgive me for delivering the rest of my speech in German.
Ladies and gentlemen, today I speak to you, the representatives of an institution that is the cradle of modern parliamentary democracy. This parliament has made very significant contributions to the development of the rule of law and democracy in Europe and the world at large. As someone who lived for 35 years in the GDR in a system which was not free, in a dictatorship, I feel particularly close to the absolute will for freedom and democracy that this parliament and this country represent as few others do. The close and friendly relations among European nations, as natural as they may seem today, were virtually inconceivable 200, 100, or even 70 years ago. For centuries, relations among European nations were marked by rivalries, changing alliances, and again, horrible bloodshed. This anniversary year, 2014 in particular, makes it incumbent upon us to commemorate the events of the past together, events that dramatically changed the face of Europe. In the whole of Europe, the focus this year is on remembering the outbreak of the First World War. The First World War 100 years ago. It was the first great catastrophe of the 20th century, soon to be followed by a second one. The beginning of the Second World War 75 years ago, and the break with civilization that was the Shoah. This is a special year of commemoration for Britain too, where you remember your dead, your losses, and the untold suffering that Germany brought through these wars to you. As German Chancellor, I bow my head before the victims of these horrible wars. What would have become of Europe if the people of this country, your country, had not put up such courageous resistance, part of the time standing all alone? What would have been the consequences if they had not found, if you had not found the strength to protect your way of life and to keep alive the hopes of all the nations of Europe for a better future in freedom? The United Kingdom has no need to furnish proof of its commitment to Europe and its basic values. Ladies and gentlemen, this was a quotation from a speech by President Richard von Weizsäcker, which he delivered to both houses of Parliament. Yes, it is true, and it cannot be said often enough. The United Kingdom has no need to furnish proof of its commitment to Europe and its basic values. We Germans can only be grateful to our European partners and to the United Kingdom in particular for placing such trust in a democratic Germany after the horrors of 2 world wars. Allow me to use this opportunity to thank all those almost 1.7 million British servicemen and women and their families who served in Germany. In hindsight, European unification that has brought us by now almost half a century of peace, freedom and prosperity seems almost like a miracle. From the Franco-German friendship to the good cooperation and partnership of today 28 member states in the European Union. Yes, it is a miracle. And yet, at the same time, the result of policies by far-sighted and responsible statesmen such as Winston Churchill, Charles de Gaulle, Konrad Adenauer, made possible through their readiness for reconciliation and their courage for change. We owe it to them that we live in a political order today where differences of opinion and conflicts of interest are no longer settled through acts of war, but peacefully at the negotiating table. We owe it to them that we live in a political order today where it is no longer a very small and select group of people who control the fate of Europe through secret diplomacy, but where all of the 28 member states enjoy the same rights and work together with European institutions to shape European policy to the benefit of its citizens. With European unification, we show that we had learned the lessons of a history of bloody conflicts and suffering. Together, we change Europe for the better. Thanks to the peaceful revolution in Central and Eastern Europe, whose 25th anniversary we celebrate this year, further borders in Europe could be overcome. How grateful we ought to be and how lucky we were can be easily seen if we look at events in Ukraine, for example. We shall lend our support to the people there and to those in many other countries when rule of law and freedom are to be protected. For me personally, as for millions of people behind the Iron Curtain, the fall of the wall in 1989 was a moment of almost unbelievable happiness. I am a personal witness to the possibility that change, and change for the better, is possible. This awareness ought to guide us in this anniversary year. Every political generation has its responsibility. We too, the politicians of today. Standstill may quickly turn into a setback. Or, to use a famous quotation of Winston Churchill, perfect is to change often. This, to me, seems, well, almost a wisdom that is particularly appropriate for us politicians. But seriously speaking, we need courage to bring about a change for the better today just as much as it was needed decades ago. We needed to continue to write the success story of European unification. For today, the challenge we face is nothing less than the question whether Europe will be able to assert its values, its interests, and its economic and social strength that brings prosperity to its people durably also in the 21st century. In view of the strength of the United States of America and of many of the emerging economies, that is anything but a matter of course. But this is precisely the task of those who are today in political responsibility. On the 25th of March 2007, we, the member states of the European Union, promised each other on the occasion of the 50th anniversary of the signing of the Treaties of Rome in the Berlin Declaration, and I quote, "Our history reminds us that we must protect this good fortune for the good of future generations. For that reason, we must constantly renew the political shape of Europe in keeping with the times." End of quote. We must renew Europe in keeping with the times so that it may fulfill its promise of peace, freedom, and prosperity also for future generations. I know that many consider the mission of the European Union to bring about peace to be accomplished. In the immediate post-war period, it was an obvious motivation for Europeans to unite, so they say. Now, they go on, many think that this promise has become obsolete, since a war among the member states of the European Union is considered well-nigh impossible today. True, a war among the member states of the European Union is today inconceivable. But let us not forget, the last war on the European continent broke out less than a generation ago. The Western Balkans brought home to all of us how close we still are to the threat of military conflict. Our soldiers and police are still deployed there on the ground. Without a European perspective for these countries, a peaceful future for them would be a very remote possibility indeed. We need to continue to stand up resolutely against extremist and inhumane tendencies that still exist in Europe today. We need to fight any form of hatred and terrorism and violence day by day. It is incumbent upon us, the member states of the European Union, to hand down the lessons we learned from our history to future generations, and to stand up for peace and the rule of law in our immediate neighborhood and in the rest of the world. What is also important in this respect is to empower others to see to their own stability and security in their region, settling conflicts peacefully if possible. Britain and Germany continue to work together closely to attain this goal. We shoulder responsibility jointly in the hotspots of today's world: Afghanistan, the Horn of Africa, Mali, the Balkans. We are allies in NATO. We jointly work for better coordination between NATO as a transatlantic alliance and the European security and defense policy. For in spite of many differences of opinion that have always existed and still exist between us and our partners and friends on both sides of the Atlantic, we, the United States of America and Europe, we could not wish for a better partner. Our relations are of prime importance, and Britain is one, if not the most important anchor of stability in this relationship. Ladies and gentlemen, we need to reform the political shape of Europe in keeping with the times, so that Europe may fulfill its second promise too, the promise of freedom. Freedom of opinion, freedom of faith, freedom of the press, and the four freedoms of the single market: free trade, freedom of movement, freedom of services, and free exchange of capital and payments. These are the crucial preconditions for democracy and prosperity, and they belong together. A Europe without borders is one of the greatest achievements of European unification. All member states, all citizens benefit from this. But it is also true that to maintain and preserve this freedom of movement and gain acceptance for it from our citizens, even today, we need to muster the courage to point out mistakes and tackle them. In our European democracies, freedom is secured through rule of law. For the economy, too, a reliable legal framework is precondition for the entrepreneurial spirit to flourish and for trade. This is the foundation for our single market. Germany and Britain want to tap the potential of this single market so as to maintain our prosperity with in other regions of the world through fair and open trade with those regions in the world. Also, in order to fulfill this third promise of Europe, we need to change the political shape of Europe in keeping with the times, too. We need to remind ourselves time and again that the world is not waiting for Europe. Economic potential, competitiveness need to be continuously strengthened and renewed. For a long time, we Europeans have thought it only natural that economic development, by and large, would only ever move upward. With the common market, with a single market and the common currency, we've written a success story that is virtually unparalleled in the rest of the world and that has opened up opportunities for all of us. But with the global financial crisis, followed by the sovereign debt crisis, we had to acknowledge that in the euro area too, the foundations for prosperity and growth in Europe need to be worked on and need to be secured time and again. But let's be honest. The root causes of the crisis in the euro area were essentially self-made. Already in 1992, when European Monetary and Economic Union was introduced through the Treaty of Maastricht, one failed to support monetary union by a strong economic union, and thus the difference in competitiveness of the euro member states became bigger instead of smaller. For some, it was therefore possible over years to build up mountains of debts without this leading to higher interest rates or the sanctions provided for cases like this in the Stability and Growth Pact actually taking effect. I am firmly convinced that in coping with the global financial crisis, just as with the European sovereign debt crisis, is that it is not sufficient to resign oneself to merely somehow muddle through. Our ambition must be a different one. Our ambition must be to emerge stronger from the crisis than we went in. Because this is precisely what this is all about, asserting our values and interests in the world at large. Or, to quote again Richard von Weizsäcker and his speech here, after 2 world wars, the global balance of powers has changed drastically. The nations of Europe will only have a history of their own in keeping with their traditions if they proceed together. End of quote. He said this almost 30 years ago. Since then, the world has changed dramatically. The opposing blocs of the Cold War no longer exist. Globalization and digitalization determine our way of life, how we do business, and how we work in a way that we never imagined before. But this does not detract in any way from the validity of von Weizsäcker's argument. On the contrary, it is actually gaining in strength and importance because, translated to today's world, his words essentially mean that we in Europe, Germany, Britain, all of us, in this age of globalization and digitalization of the 21st century, will only still have our own history if we stand together and remain together, and as European nations always live up to two basic principles in all our actions: responsibility and solidarity. Ladies and gentlemen, more than 7 billion people live on our planet today. We, 500 million Europeans, have a share of just about of the global.
Well, we have some technical difficulties with the feed there from the Houses of Parliament, but a keynote speech from the German Chancellor Angela Merkel is very much about Europe and the political future of Europe. She talked about the need to reform the political shape of Europe, which will be welcome news to Prime Minister David Cameron, who's currently debating that issue here in the UK, which is seen as Eurosceptic. We can tune back into her. She's got the signal back.
See Britain as an important ally in this endeavour. The European Union must become stronger, must become more stable, more competitive than it is today. It must rally round and focus on the great challenges of our time. A strong European Union needs strong European institutions and strong member states who represent our common interests in the world, united and self-confident. Although Europe has a share of 25% in the global economy, over the next 5 years, according to the estimates of the WTO, 90% of global growth will be generated outside of Europe. Therefore, in order to be able to keep the European promise of prosperity also in the future, it will be absolutely crucial to benefit from the growth potential of other parts of the world. And for this, we need to bring down more barriers to trade. Particularly the planned free trade agreement of the European Union with the United States of America can give an important boost to growth and employment in Europe. Right from the start, Britain and Germany were among the strongest supporters of such an agreement. And together, we will continue to work for speedy negotiations and an ambitious result. A result which will include, to state this very clearly, also questions of privacy and data protection. We have to make better use of the strengths of the European Union, using it for our joint interests on, for example, international climate protection. For no European member state alone would have the necessary political clout to hold its own in international negotiations. A stable, competitive European Union can reconcile economic success and social responsibility in a lasting way. For this, those countries that are members of the euro have to complement monetary union through a strong economic union with a clear-cut and resilient architecture. Only through close and more binding economic coordination will we be able to avoid getting again in heavy waters in a very bad crisis in the euro area in the foreseeable future. As I see it, the contractual basis of economic and monetary union has to be clearly delineated and speedily adjusted in a targeted manner to achieve a sustainable stabilization of monetary union. All of the member states will then have to submit all of their policies on Europe, be it on energy, climate, shaping the single market, or foreign trade, to scrutiny if these policies contribute to bolstering Europe's economic strength or not. European policies are to improve the framework conditions for creative initiative, innovation, entrepreneurship, and employment. This means that we need to cut unnecessary red tape at the European level that hampers our companies in Germany, just as in the United Kingdom. We always have to measure up with the best of them in the world. Therefore, European rules and regulations need to be subject to regular reviews, just as national rules and regulations. Should they prove to be superfluous, they have to be scrapped. This is why we, Britain and Germany, together have seen to it that the European Commission finally takes the issue of better regulation seriously and acts on it. The European Commission may only regulate where member states have not passed sufficient regulations themselves. The principle of subsidiarity needs to be respected more in Europe. It is in this spirit that Britain and Germany ought to set priorities for the work of the future Commission together with our partners. We are gratified to note that we are not at the very beginning of that particular road, but have actually come quite a long way already. The concept of helping only on the basis of a quid pro quo, that is, granting assistance only if structural reforms and fiscal consolidation are pursued in the euro area, is beginning to take effect. Unit labor costs in many countries are dropping, and in certain countries, for the very first time since a number of years, we see current account surpluses. It was and is urgently necessary also to create a sound and responsible financial system. Never again should taxpayers have to foot the bill when banks and financial institutions make mistakes. The financial industry, too, has to contribute to the common weal. I say this quite purposefully here in London, since London, as a financial centre, is of such great importance for the common European market, the financial market, and thus for the economy of all European member states. In the negotiations on MFR, the next budget of the EU, Britain and Germany together saw to it that in times of severe cuts in national budgets, in Europe too, expenditure is focused on what is necessary and on what is important to secure Europe's future. Priority here is on investment in science and research. Without attaining top rank in innovative inventions and developments for the 21st century, we will fall behind, and we will also lose prosperity. In many areas, only to mention the Internet as one example, we are no longer among the best. We have to close that gap again, and we will only be able to achieve this if all of us in Europe join forces and pull in the same direction. I am convinced if we continue to make it very clear that we are serious about wishing to change, we will find the necessary legal instruments to reach our goals. Only a strong and competitive European Union will be able to fulfill its promise of prosperity also for future generations and regain the trust of its citizens. Ladies and gentlemen, we Germans shall never forget that the happy and prosperous development of our country is inseparable from the history of the European Union. We Germans shall never forget that we owe the happy and prosperous development of our country to the readiness of our European partners and friends to forgive and to stretch out a hand of friendship and reconciliation. We Germans are aware of our responsibility for a good future for the Union. And this is why we shall do everything we can to enable the European Union to keep its promise of peace, freedom and prosperity for generations to come. What we are going to do now, or what we fail to do to reform the political shape of the European Union in keeping with the times, will decide Europe's future. Our ideas of how the future European Union ought to look like may vary on the details, but we, Germany and Britain, share the goal of seeing a strong, competitive European Union join forces.
United and determined, we can defend our European economic and social model
In der Welt vertreten. Einig und entschlossen
we can bring our values and interests to bear in the world. United and determined, we can serve as a model for other regions of the world. This, and nothing less than this, should be our common goal. I regard it as the task for our generation. In order to attain this goal, we need a strong United Kingdom with a strong voice inside the European Union. If we have that, we will be able to make the necessary changes for the benefit of all. In German, as in English, we have the saying, all good things come in threes. So, to conclude, I would like to quote for a third time from Richard von Weizsäcker's speech to these two houses at the outset of the United Kingdom's European presidency. He said, Europe will not move forward by leaps and bounds, but step by step. We Germans will take these steps with the United Kingdom, and we do so happily. May I wish you and all of us on this path the best luck. End of quote. What was true almost 30 years ago remains true today. For the sake of the future of the United Kingdom and Germany, for the sake of the success of the European Union, and for the good of future generations. Thank you.
Angela Merkel showing off her near-perfect English at the end of that speech to the joint houses of Parliament. It's a rare honour in this country. Full red carpet treatment today. She goes on for now for talks at Downing Street with the Prime Minister, also meeting opposition leaders, and then she has tea with the Queen. And she talked there about the need to reform Europe, but also saying that a united and strong Europe is crucial, not just for those members of the Eurozone, but also for Britain, where it's often seen as a Eurosceptic country. With me is Stephen Booth, the Research Director at the business think tank Open Europe. You've been waiting for this speech for some time. What was the highlight for you?
Well, there was clearly a strong focus on economic competitiveness and the need for Europe to up its game in kind of the global economic stakes, and the fact she mentioned sort of the need for more innovation and creativity in Europe's economy. But I think the politically significant point was that she conceded that a lot of the problems in the Eurozone were self-made and therefore would need major correction. And she also hinted that that was an opportunity for other countries, such as the UK and other non-Euro countries, to put forward their own ideas for European reform. So I think, from David Cameron's point of view, that's the kind of thing he would like to be hearing, and is encouraging news for him, because that a lot of talk has been, well, there won't be a chance to change Europe because Europe isn't going to change. Well, I think Merkel was very clear that the Eurozone needs to change in order to become more sustainable.
And she's open to ideas.
And I think she'll be open to ideas. I mean, obviously the question mark is whether that timetable fits David Cameron's timetable. That's still the open question.
What you're referring to there is he's promised a referendum in
2017.
In 2017, and by that point he needs to be very clear on his policy, but he's got an election next year. His party is split along Euro lines, you know, pro-European and anti-European, so he probably wants to wait until after the election to outline what he wants from Merkel.
Well, I think that's one of the weaknesses in Cameron's current strategy, is that he hasn't outlined enough of what he wants to see change in Europe ahead of the general election and ahead of his campaign to change Europe, because he can't do it solely in the UK, he can't do it solely with Angela Merkel. It requires agreement across Europe. So he has to start getting out there and making the arguments, not just to Germany and not just to the Netherlands, the sort of the very sympathetic countries, but also to countries who might need more persuading, because you need that time, the momentum to build.
She referred at the beginning of the speech, didn't she, to world wars, and she talked about how, as a German Chancellor, she bows her head before the victims of those horrible wars. For her, because of the history of Germany, the European project is about peace, largely, isn't it? It started off as a peaceful project. Let's just listen to a couple of things she talked about.
I regard this invitation as an expression of the close relations between our countries. Not only the governments, but also the people of our two countries are linked by close partnership. I shall never forget my first visit to London in the spring of 1990, very soon after the fall of the Berlin Wall and quite a few months before German unification.
And unification comes hand in hand with the European project, which is why it's so important to her.
Sure. I mean, for Germany, the European Union is a much greater part of their national identity than it is in Britain. And I think that will remain the case. And also Germany's willingness to go along with the Eurozone and in the Euro, it clearly shows a deeper desire and deeper... It is, by virtue of circumstance, more intertwined with Europe than Britain is. So I don't think that is going to change. But I think what was clear was that her appetite for saying, well, actually, we can't go along as before and Europe has to move with the times, that is something that will be encouraging for the UK, who wants to see change as well. And
the UK is very much behind the economic project, sees the sense of having a big, strong economic bloc. The debate is how much control Europe has over British laws, for example. And there's also references, I think, to the speech there as well about the movement of, well, it was a nod towards the immigration debate as well. So she's also addressing that.
Yes, she was very clear that the four freedoms, including the movement of people, come together as a package. And I think that Germany is clear on that. However, Germany is also sympathetic to UK concerns about the rights of people when they move around, so access to welfare systems in different countries. That's something that Germany and the UK have lots of common ground on.
Deputy Prime Minister Nick Clegg is very pro-European. He actually worked at Strasbourg for a while as well. She'll have a meeting with him. It'll be interesting. The meetings with him and with the Labour leader, the opposition leader, are as important, aren't they? Because if we're heading into an election, she could get a sense of where they're going to go. There's no guarantee that David Cameron will even be in power after the election, particularly if he wants to go it alone.
Yes, that's right. I mean, from Angela Merkel's point of view, she's not sure who she might be negotiating with post-2015, so it makes sense to lay the ground with the other leaders. But I do think that there is no matter who's in charge, there has to be some reconciliation between what is it to be a member of the European Union-wide bloc in the single market and what is it to be a member of the Eurozone? And she talked quite clearly there about the need for the Eurozone to change. And whatever happens in the Eurozone will affect the rest of the members of the European club, including the UK. So whatever Prime Minister is in charge in the UK, they will have to respond to those changes and make a British case for reform and what they want the European Union to be. So it's not just an issue for David Cameron, this is an issue that faces Britain at large.
OK. Stephen Booth, thank you very much indeed. We will digest this. We'll also, through the day, bring you the rest of Angela Merkel's red carpet treatment here in London. It's worth noting she's not head of state, but it will look like a head of state's visit because she'll even be at Buckingham Palace a bit later on. We'll bring you images of that. But for now, you're watching CNN Newsroom. We'll be back in just a moment.